Alright, so we are going to talk about watercolor, and you're going to be using watercolor on your perspective drawing. So a few things you want to know about watercolor before you use it is watercolor, the first word is water. Okay, it's supposed to look very, very different than acrylic paint. It's supposed to be transparent, and you're supposed to be able to see the layers in the brush strokes, whereas with acrylic paint, it's supposed to look very flat, very opaque and solid. So I'm going to start with, I've got several different kinds of brushes here. I've got a flat top brush, and I can see that because the top of the bristles are flat. They make one straight line. Then I also have a smaller flat top brush, and then I have round top brushes, and I can see that because the top of the bristles are pointy. And so these will be used for different types of lines, which I will show you in a bit. But the first thing you want, obviously, is a cup of water. You want a watercolor palette, and if your paint looks like it's all dried and nasty, that's okay, because as long as you add water to the paint, you can reactivate it. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to get my clean water, and I'm going to start with this red color right here. And it's going to take a little bit of time to add more and more water. But you'll see that the paint, once I add the water and start mixing it around with my paintbrush, is ready to use. So we're going to do a couple of practice kind of brush strokes on this paper right here. Alright, and right now I am using a flat top brush. And as you can see, I'm able to make a straight line very easily because of this flat top brush. I'm using the shape of the brush to do that. Okay, if I want it darker, if I don't want it to be quite as transparent, quite as light like that, then all I need to do is add more paint. Less water, more paint. So that's kind of the first rule of thumb in watercolor, is you don't actually add white to a color to make it lighter. You just add more water. If you want something to be darker, you use more paint and less water. So that's the difference there. There's no white, it's just the white of the paper showing through. The second thing with watercolor is you don't want to use black straight out of the tube. And I'm going to show you toward the end of the demo how to mix some neutral colors that will work really well to substitute for a black, but you never want to use straight black with watercolor. It ends up looking very flat and very dull. Alright, so if I want to, let's say like I'm going to paint a cityscape, which you're doing for your project, chances are we probably don't have this bright red everywhere. So I'm going to end up wanting to mix some different colors. The easy way to do that is you don't want to use one color straight out of the tube. This red is straight out of the tube. We can tell if we are using the tube, it's the same exact color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring more red into this mixing area. And if your mixing area already has another color in it, like there's a little bit of green underneath here, that's okay. If you don't want that, all you need to do is take a rag and simply wipe some of that out. Okay, now that has to be wet underneath in order for that to work, but that's how you would just clean that part of your palette. You never want to clean your entire palette because you can use all of the leftover paint that's already on it. Alright, so if I would like to kind of dull that red, if I'm going for more like a barn red, or if I'm going for something a little less vibrant, a little more natural looking, I'm actually going to add water to this kind of ochre color right here. And I'm going to start kind of mixing the two. And again, rinse your brush whenever you need to clean it. Once your water starts getting dirty, you need to get new water. If your watercolor is green and you're trying to make a red, well, that green water is going to affect your color. Okay. So that didn't make a huge difference, and that means I need a little bit more of that ochre color, but let's try this mix. It's starting to look a little more natural in terms of colors. This is always going to be more successful than using a color straight out of the tube. So just remember that. You want your colors to be natural. Experiment with mixing different colors together to do that. So if you wanted to use a round top brush, again, let's use the same color so you can see the difference. Round top brush is great for these curvy lines. And that red's starting to look a little bit better with that ochre in it. But again, I'm using the shape of the brush to my advantage to make curvy, more organic lines, whereas the flat top brush is used for these straight, more geometric lines, which would be great for the edges of buildings if you're doing that in your cityscape. All right, so there are two types of watercolor techniques. The first one is called dry brush, and that's actually what I was just doing. And the second is called wet on wet. So wet on wet would be great for a sky. So it requires you to wet the paper first. And the reason you're wetting the paper is because you're going to get some really nice blending of colors. Okay, if the paper is already wet, your color ends up spreading out across these water droplets. So the more water you add, the more your paint is going to blend together because it has more liquid to move around on top of. So I'm going to go to my red again, and you'll see how much it really starts to expand just because of that water that's underneath it. Okay, now I'm going to mix more of this ochre color, but I want it a little bit more pure, so let's try this. And this is not my favorite color combination, but it's got some nice contrast, which is why I'm using it. I want you to see how the colors will start to blend together. And notice I'm not really going into the red areas as I'm doing this. I'm kind of leaving those pure so it doesn't get too muddy. Okay, and as that water starts to dry and as it starts to spread, you're going to see these two colors start to kind of blend together. If you wanted more blending, all you have to do is go and kind of work your way across. And this is a dry brush, so it's, if you notice, it's taking a little bit of paint off. That's okay. I'm also going to use it to kind of spread out my edges because I don't like that harsh line that it's creating. And a lot of people don't like watercolor because they think it's hard to control. So the number one rule to remember is if you're doing wet on wet, the color is going to go wherever you put water. So if you don't want color in a certain section, so if I'm doing different buildings and I only want color in one area, then only put water on that area. Wait for it to dry and then do the area next to it. But wherever you have water, your color is going to go. Okay, there is one trick to kind of undoing some of your watercolor if you don't like it, and that is anywhere like this area right here where it's pooling up. I don't really like that area. I think it's too intense compared to these areas. So take a clean rag and all you do is apply it, apply pressure. Don't want to rub the rag around, okay? And then it undoes a lot of that. So that is one way to control watercolor if you're not liking your results. That area had a lot of water, so I just applied the rag and I was able to take a lot of that water off. Okay, and again, if I don't like some of these areas where it ends kind of abruptly, I'm going to take a wet brush, no color, and I'm going to kind of reactivate those areas and spread that out. Okay, and my paper is getting some specks of dirt on it, but I can just kind of get those off when it dries. So that's wet on wet, and you'll see it looks extremely pale right now. There's not a lot of contrast, and that's because watercolor requires layers. It's not something where you do one layer and it's finished. You have to do multiple layers. So I would need to wait for this to dry, and then I would need to do another layer on top, and then probably another layer on top of that. A good rule of thumb is 3 layers. But this is how it's supposed to look the first time around. You're supposed to see the paper, you're supposed to see your brush strokes. That is how watercolor is meant to be. So here's the difference between wet on wet and dry brush. Dry brush is great for clean lines, maybe for the edges of your buildings. and for sidewalks, more precise details. And then wet on wet is awesome for grassy areas or for skies or for anywhere where you want to blend out any kind of texture or values. All right, so the last step is mixing neutral colors. And neutral colors are the ones that kind of replace your black when we're using watercolor. So you want to look at the color wheel for this, and you want to look at complementary colors. So in this case, I've got a red and I've got a green, and those are both complementary. They're across from each other on the color wheel. We have 3 sets of complementary colors, red and green, blue and orange, which looks like I don't have an orange right now, but I can mix it, and then yellow and violet. Those are our 3 sets of complementary colors. All 3 of those sets will get you neutral colors. So, what I mean by that is we're going to do our red-green combo since I have the red ready. And I'm going to put it over here where I have some green already. It would be an easy place to mix. That green underneath is going to start reactivating. Oh, it looks like there's a little bit of white in there. So any color that's underneath, if you're adding water, it's going to reactivate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe out that white because I don't want that. It's going to affect my color mixture. And then I'm going to take some green from this area. I'll need to reactivate it. Add it. And this does take a little bit of patience, but if you see, actually right here, I've got a really nice neutral color. So that's kind of a warmer neutral color. You can see the green's not mixing very well there, but that's okay. I just need to add more water or just keep going over it with the brush. But that's going to give me a really beautiful kind of brown. So this would be good for dirt or for different kinds of buildings if it's a neutral color building. But I'm not using any black to get that. Okay, another way to do that is by doing blue, which is, we're going to go to another set of complementary colors, blue, and then orange. And again, you must wash your brush in between each color so you don't contaminate the next color. And that's close to an orange, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that. Again, washing my brush in between each color so I don't contaminate. And this is kind of a yellow orange, so we're gonna, there we go. And I'm gonna do one more little bit of this orange to make my mixture. And this is gonna make a really nice, oh, it looks like there's a little bit of violet in there. So that will happen with these palettes. Some color from underneath is coming up, but again, look how easy it is. I just added more paint and more water. It is super easy to blend that out. And that's a really nice gray. Oh, there we go again. Not a big deal. Add more water. So the biggest thing to remember about watercolor is it is actually really easy to control, even though at first it may seem hard to. If I don't like any of that, if it's pooling up in one area, again, apply your rag. And as long as it's wet, you should get some of it coming up. You could also do that if you wanted to create contrast in an area like this. So this would be kind of like clouds. You could do that really easily, and that's just using my rag. Later I might go back with some more color and kind of emphasize some of the darker areas. And since my paper is wet right now, right here, this is going to turn into a wet on wet process. And you'll see these little chunks of violet are going to start to blend and kind of fade out. Okay, and let's see, I'll do my flat top. I want to blend those out a little bit more. So I'm just going to add some water kind of around the edge, but not really in the middle, because I want to keep that violet nice and dark, and if I add water to it, it's going to lighten up. Okay, so this would be a really easy way to create a cool effect in the sky, whether it's a stormy kind of sky, or you could do this with brighter colors. But again, I just took my rag and took away some of that watercolor to create some contrast. And I mixed these neutral colors without using any black. Just remember your complementary colors, mix them together, that's how you get a neutral. So the thing I want to emphasize, and I've said it before, but as this starts to dry, you'll see how pale the first layer of watercolor really is. This is not how you want to leave your painting. You want to always layer and layer on top. If you want something to be brighter or bolder, it's going to take more layers. So the rule of thumb is 3 layers on everything, and then if you want to emphasize anything else, you can do more layers on that area. Watercolor is meant to be transparent. We're supposed to see the paper, we're supposed to see the brush strokes, so you don't want to hide the paper, but you do want to layer so you get the richness of color and the intensity of color. And then you also want to layer, probably with a smaller brush on your final layer, doing dry brush for your details, maybe like bricks or maybe like columns, outlining specific sharp kind of details. That would be a last final layer, and you would use the dry brush technique. So review this video whenever you need to remember a certain technique or whenever you need a reminder of something. But just remember, watercolor is transparent. Making something lighter, you add water. Making something darker, you simply use more paint. And I'm going to start working on this cityscape, and then I'll show you guys in class, once this is finished, I'll show you how I use these watercolor techniques in this video to complete this cityscape.